In the gospel reading this morning, it was shown here how the Pharisees and Herodians were trying to trap our Lord Jesus Christ through a statement. And yet, as we know that our Lord Jesus Christ can fully discern what they were up to, and we know that no one can deceive the Son of God in any way. And in the parable, it was about the asking whether is it lawful to pay a poll tax to Caesar or not. Caesar would be symbolizing the present government at that time. And yet, God said that render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Render would mean to inflict or to repay. And we are reminded also that whatever present government or authority there is, even in these present times, that we are to render whatever obligations we have. And yet, with the Lord, it's a different story. We know that what belongs to the world belongs to the world, and what belongs to God belongs to God. There's a very distinct difference between those two. And we know also that in God's truth requires a response from us. Repaying God's truth requires a response from us. How do we repay God, or how do we render what is supposed to be for God alone? We are subjected to the present government, yes, or whoever authority has been assigned or appointed, because that would be also pleasing to God. But we are to stand firm in godly principles, as we are fully aware of, and as God would reveal things to us along the way, that we really are to stick to God's truth. And that requires a response. This is the question that I would pose. How would we describe our usual pattern of response to God's truth? How will we choose? We know that God would require faithfulness from us. And faithfulness would lead to fruitfulness. As we know, faith without action is dead. And how do we prove our faithfulness? But taking action and bearing fruit along the way. That is one way of responding to God's truth. And to repay God, or to render to God what is supposed to be for God, is to be fulfilling His God-given responsibilities. Using His gifts, the God-given gifts. We are to discover that spiritual gifts. Another question, are you using your God-given abilities to serve Christ and others? So it's a long process for us. But then, unlike in the world that we can be dismayed at times, although of course in our journey with God, we face the highs and lows of situations along the way. But more so that we are to be aware that all those obstacles along the way would be leading to the truth of bearing fruit in the end. And yet we know we have a choice to make. And let us remember, as the season of Lent would be coming in, the way to the kingdom is the way of the cross. The way to the kingdom is the way of the cross. And our prime example is our Lord Jesus Christ. He gave of Himself, sacrificial giving of oneself for others. So the way to the kingdom is the way of the cross. May we bear that in mind. And yet, along the way, we know that when we obey God, we experience His blessings. When we obey God, we experience His blessings. And mind you, suffering can work for our benefit and God's glory. Yeah, we go through the process. And yet, as we suffer, it works for our own benefit. That we may realize it really does. In the end, you become a tougher Christian. In the end, you become more resilient. There's always, may katapat palaging positive side of it. God knows how to mold us in the way that we should be molded. And let us really learn more and more to really entrust everything to God. Things would be unpleasant, yes. And yet, as we go through sufferings, it always works for our benefit. And that way we get tougher. We get to be a witness to God's power working in each one of us. The empowerment side of things. And two-way, as we render what should be for God alone, there's always the great benefit along the way, and may we never miss out on that. Yes, unpleasant things. That's how God would really show forth His glory in all those things. We can never quantify things. We can never say, maliit na bagay lang, malaking bagay, o malaking problema, maliit na problema. To God, it doesn't matter. Because in the end, He's bound to be glorified always. So as we prepare for the season of Lent, once again, may we be reminded, it really struck me, the way to the kingdom is the way of the cross. So may we learn to render what is due to God, with calmness in our hearts, with the assurance that God is always there, towing the line for us, never leaving us nor forsaking us in any way. The beauty of journeying with the Lord every day. In this troubled world we live in, there's so much happening right now. Greater things are happening, we know. Even with people dying, those countries affected by the earthquake, loss of lives increasing, and yet we can truly feel how blessed we are because we know we have been called to serve and we have a mission to fulfill. And may we not cower in fear, but be a witness to the blessings of God and God's glory in every situation that we are facing up to. And may we learn to carry our cross daily with the assurance that God's love is always there for us, His grace and His mercy.